Okay, the next keynote speaker from Prof. Dr. Eric Atwell.
Hopefully you can see, there's the presentations that are happening today. So I've been, before I start, I just wanted to say I have been listening to using the translation system. I'm really impressed about this automatic translation system. For future, I would recommend that it would be helpful if all of the talk titles were also translated in the program. So I had to wait until I actually saw the presentations for the Arabic ones to find out what they're about, because my Arabic is really bad. So I listened to these, but I couldn't see in advance what was coming up. Okay, so what I want to talk about is, so here's me. I'm Professor of Artificial Intelligence for Language in the School of Computing. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I do supervise various bits of research in using language technology, and in particular, religious text and analysis, Arabic corpus linguistics. The nice thing is the machine learning can understand the Arabic. I don't have to understand the Arabic. But more increasingly, there's a lot of interest since ChatGPT was released a year ago. Suddenly everybody's thinking about using chatbots and ChatGPT for education and other applications. So what I want to talk about is limitations of large language models. Other people have already discussed some of these. The previous speaker just talked about this. There's a lot of sort of technical limitations, things that it can't do. And to be able to understand what it can and can't do, you really have to have some idea of the underlying technology. So not so much how neural networks work, but rather what it is that it's learning and generating. But actually the real limitation is us. We have to think of really useful applications to do this marvelous new technology. We have to think creatively about how to use this. So I'll come on to that next. So the first thing is, you really want to have some idea about how the large language models work, not so much what is the neural network architecture, but how do they model language? How do they understand language? Well, underlyingly, the language model learns the meanings of words, not just how they're spelt, but how they mean. And the meaning of a word is how it's used in real samples. So one sense of large is if you give it very large amounts of training data, and then there'll be several examples of each word and the words that come around it. And these are represented in a vector called a word embedding. And then the meanings of a phrase or a sentence is just a combination of the word embeddings of the words in that phrase or sentence. But because it's trained on everything on the internet or very large amounts of text, the large language model can learn predictive patterns of words that appear together and phrases that appear together. So a large model can learn more words and more combinations from more training data. So although it's a very large piece of software, it's also large in terms of the training data and large in terms of what it can learn from that training data. For every word in English and also every word in Arabic, it knows what other words come with that and what phrases go together and what sentences have appeared before. So a large language model, it generates responses, but these responses, it's not really understanding in the same sense as humans do. It's predicting from the input text, it cuts it up into snippets. It finds matching snippets from its memory of everything it's seen before, and it uses the matches to predict what is an appropriate output. So words and phrases and sentences are predictions of current snippets that make up new sentences, which match the user input. It's not really thinking and understanding in the same sense. It is just pattern matching, but a very sophisticated pattern matching in that it can match on meanings rather than just matching on words. But you have to be aware about this, that large language models are making things up. They're making things up in the sense that they are generating combinations of words and phrases which match what is required. So, for example, I applied to become dean of the faculty well, no, the research dean of the faculty, and I used ChatGPT to generate my application, my CV. I gave it some idea about who I am. I said, find out about Eric Atwell and generate a job application for me. And it did, but it made up stuff such as Eric Atwell is president of the European Association for Computational Linguistics, which is plausible, but not true. I know it's not true because, because I know a bit about computational linguistics, I can understand how it did it. So computational linguistics is a well-known phrase. There is an association for computational linguistics, which has lots of websites and things, that therefore it will have found that on the web. Eric Atwell, from my webpage, it will have found that I'm a leader or a coordinator or things, and president is a very common term for, particularly in American English. It turns out in the UK, we don't use the term president very much. So I'm not actually president of anything as far as I'm aware, but Eric Atwell is a leader. It would be a plausible thing, and it means the same thing as far as ChatGPT is concerned. I do a lot of work in European research projects, so it makes sense to say European Association for Computational Linguistics. It happens that I know there is no European Association for Computational Linguistics. The ACL is a worldwide organization. There is a European chapter or European section, but there isn't a separate European association. And there isn't a president of it, and I'm not the president. So GPT doesn't know true or false things. It simply knows probable combinations of things. And usually, for most applications, it doesn't matter. People use ChatGPT to have a chat, just to talk about things. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. For my job application, I proofread the application before I submitted it and got rid of things which I know were not true. So what matters is relevance. So long as you proofread the stuff afterwards, it's a good first attempt. And I didn't get the job. I asked the person in charge, why didn't I get the job? And they reasonably said, well, actually, the person we found, one of the applicants has more relevant experience. And when I found out who it was, I agree. She is more qualified than I am for the job. However, that doesn't denigrate what ChatGPT did. It was able to produce a really good application, given the constraints that I'm not the best candidate for the job. It couldn't really do much about that. And this is a problem for applications where we need answers that we can trust. So, for example, in teaching, it's not safe if GPT makes up stuff in teaching the students, particularly if you're teaching Islamic studies, but also in teaching computer science or artificial intelligence. We don't want it to make up stuff which isn't true. So how do we get around this problem? Well, we saw Walid Kadous from Aniska gave us an example of Ansari. So Ansari is the general language model, but it is also constrained initially to try to only use this trusted Islamic text sources. Or in general, you can, rather than using GPT directly, you can use a program which calls the GPT API. And if a student types in a question, then the front end, the preprocessor says, answer the user query, but go to this trusted text first. Don't use your general knowledge from the internet. And that's not retraining or fine-tuning the large language model. It's simply adding an extra prompt to tell GPT, okay, you know everything, but don't use everything in your answer. Use these trusted texts in your answer. So, for example, at Leeds University, Martin Callahan has done it for his software engineering course that he teaches. Bashel Safari, she's one of my PhD students. I've asked her to create one for the data mining and text analytics courses that I'll be teaching from January onwards. Hopefully she'll have a chatbot. And having developed this, it's up to me as a teacher to think of clever uses for it, for generating multiple choice questions, or just make it available for students to answer their own questions. Ibtisam al-Shamrai, another PhD student, has been specifically using it on hadith and Islamic texts. She'll be talking about some of her work later on. And as we heard yesterday, more generally for Islamic sources. And it's a really good example of doing this. Question? Okay, well, leave the questions till later. So currently, I mean, GPT and large language models have been around for several years, but it was only last Christmas, last December, that it suddenly became available because it was put online on a website for anybody to use. That's the big difference. Large language models, up until now, up until a year ago, were only usable if you were a Python programmer and knew about AI programming interfaces and stuff. But now it's on a website, anybody can use it. And Google have come along with Bard, and Amazon are going to be releasing Q fairly soon. Microsoft, if you use the Edge platform, there's a version of GPT available there as well. So you don't have to be a programmer. However, if you want to constrain it and fine tune it to your own data, then you do have to be a programmer. So if you want to use this for teaching your own course and have your own course materials being the first port of call for any answers, then you have to develop this API software. So I predict what's coming next year in 2024 is that various companies will start having methods to upload your own text to constrain the language model to make a specialized small large language model, which is small in the sense it only uses your own texts. It still has the large language model behind it, trained on the internet and whatever else, for its knowledge of English language or Arabic language. But for the content, the prompt says, use only this text for generating the answers. So for example, at Leeds, we use Blackboard for all of our teaching. And at the moment, Martin Callahan had to write some code himself in Python to tune it to his own course. But what will probably happen next year is that if you use Blackboard or some other similar system, then the developers will include a button which allows the lecturer to train a large language model on his own teaching materials. And then there will be a large language model which he can then use or she can then use for their own students or for their own purposes. So the main limitation, although researchers like to think about technical limitations in what it can and can't do, the main limitation is actually you. And you have to think about how to use this imaginatively. So in this year, large language models have taken over. Most AI and natural language processing research is a bit about how to use large language models rather than developing new algorithms. So some innovative examples at Leeds University. Here's PhD students. Here's a PhD student project I saw a couple of weeks ago now. Our Peter Sagar is using it for simulating patient-doctor conversations with ChatGPT to support medical training. So the real hard problem at the moment is in testing medical students, that what they have to do is to test how good they are at dealing with patients, they have to get actors to pretend to be patients, and they interview the patients and try to work out what's wrong with them. And then a highly trained clinician has to watch and assess how good they are at doing this. So it's not just the students, but someone has to be a patient, and they have to be paid to be pretend patients, and a real doctor has to listen to them, and that's also very expensive. So GPT can now, given a small sample of real doctor-patient consultations, can be fine-tuned or rather constrained to generate more examples like this. And the nice thing about the artificial examples is that they're not tied by doctor-patient confidentiality. So a computing student can access these, even though the computing student can't access the original real doctor-patient examples because they're confidential. Furthermore, the GPT can act as the synthetic patient or of a doctor. So the student is the doctor, and it can interact with GPT, who pretends to be the patient. So we no longer have to pay actors to pretend to be patients. Also, another version of GPT can then analyze the transcript of the interaction and give it a mark. So we don't have to have real clinicians doing the marking anymore. GPT can act as the evaluator, grading the students. So there we have 3 different roles that are being taken over by 3 different fine-tuned versions of GPT. We've also got a whole load of other students. So the reason I say this is doctor-patient, but you can see the same sort of thing happening if you're training students to understand Islamic concepts. Then you can imagine you want to test the students to see how well they've tested, that they've learned, and you can have an interaction with them in the same sort of way. So Munir Alidi is doing the same sort of thing for Arabic to English translation studies education. Abraham Mohammed is going one stage further in that you may have videos for teaching, and you may want to train the chatbot to use the videos in teaching. I had thought, I mean, people have said GPT is very much fine-tuned for English. It's now versions are coming up for Arabic. But I thought it'd be quite difficult to get it to identify very specific Saudi dialects, for example. Can you tell the difference between Northern dialect and Eastern dialect? Well, Salah Al-Amari, who's going to be talking later, she's been able to do this using ChatGPT. I'm quite astonished at how this works. Saud Al-Tabiti has used it for detecting fake news and disinformation in Arabic internet, Arabic tweets and so on. Albertul Al-Amri's looked at authors who write in English and in Arabic, and do they use the same style in their Arabic writing as in their English writing? Again, this is something you wouldn't have thought a chatbot would be able to do, but okay. Rawan bin Shia is looking at bias in texts for university education. She started off by looking at the Leeds University news website over several decades, and was able to find that there's a lot of stories about white men and not so many stories about non-white, non-men, for example. Simin Hong has looked at transcripts of doctor-patient interactions for mental health cases, and was able to figure out how to measure the severity of depression. Fan Jingli is looking at the reasoning behind it. So it's asked, ChatGPT can be asked to a sort of logic problem, and how does it solve the problem? You'd think by generating text, which is made up of snippets of text it's seen before, that's not using logic, but it does seem to be able to do logic surprisingly well. Now, as a professor, I also have the pleasure of reviewing lots of research grant applications. So these are not research that's happening at the moment, but these are academics, even postgraduate students, applying for research grants. And in the applications for research grants, I've been able to see lots and lots of, most research grants seem to be applying for research on using GPT in innovative ways. So here's some examples I've seen recently. Sign language recognition, translation, and so on, obviously. Reasoning from images and from videos and things. A lot of interest in medical applications, personalized disease diagnosis and drug recommendations, predicting personality traits for analyzing the transcripts of doctor-patient interactions, detecting the signs of mental health disorders, but it also generally online and in social media, detecting misogynistic online content, even in mixed code. So in Arabic websites, Arabic social media, you may have snippets of English mixed in with the Arabic, or snippets of other languages mixed in. So that makes it even harder. And because ChatGPT is trained on everything on the internet, it can cope with mixtures of Arabic and English and Spanish and so on. Another big application area, it's sort of health related, is that there's a growing older population, and GPT is being widely touted as this sort of carers and things. Or there's also a lot of people posting stuff about well, COVID at the moment, vaccines not being safe. So you want to combat misinformation in healthcare, or things not being true. So, okay, verifying and auditing AI-generated content in education. Another really interesting thing at Leeds University, Chrissy Narazzi, she's a professor of education, and she asked her postgraduate students to each of them come up with a one-page idea on how to use AI for education. And there's a collection of 101 creative ideas crowdsourced from education students at Leeds University. And I wouldn't say all of these are that brilliant. They're not technically proficient. However, I looked through and found 3 or 4 ideas which I can directly use in my teaching. So the previous talker talked about AI being useful. If you're an educator, you may want to have specific ideas to use in your teaching. And here we are. Just go through these and pluck a few which you can use in your own ideas. So the challenge is, can Islamic scholars use not all, but maybe some of these ideas for Islamic education? So in conclusion, okay, there are limitations to large language models, and a lot of researchers like to see, I mean, it's easy to pick holes, to find things it's not doing right. But if you remember that large language models they're not trying to lie, they're not trying to do badly things. They are simply taking snippets of text from the input and finding snippets of text in their training data which seem to match and outputting these. So don't blame them for being lying or incorrect, but rather when you're using them, bear that in mind and use your intelligence to think of useful ways of using this limited technology. So the main limitation about usage and application of large language models is our own imagination. We need to think creatively about how to make good use of these and not just slag them off as making mistakes. The challenge to Islamic scholars is, can you imagine new uses of large language models for Islamic education and research? Don't just say, no, we can't use them, but can you use them in a good way? Okay, and I think I'm going to stop now so that we can catch up and let the PhD students who actually want to present useful stuff about their research to say something.
And thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much for your wonderful speech and very fast. Okay, I think we have some couple of questions. There's Brother Basil here already raised up your hand. Brother Basil, are you around?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's start with you, then followed by Prof.
Yeah. Hi, Professor Atwell. I am Basil from the physics, the theoretical physics. I have seen you in the department, second floor. My question is concerning the hadith, the narration of the hadith of Prophet Muhammad, whether there is any attempt to develop what I call signature of authenticity within the large language models, if you know anything about that.
Yeah, okay, so there are, I did mention that there's been a lot of research on authenticity of tweets. During the COVID crisis, a large amount of research went into trying to stop misinformation, stop people saying that the vaccinations will give you measles or something crazy like that. And maybe some of these techniques could be applied to hadith as well. I guess it's up to Islamic scholars to verify the results.
Yes, I think this is very important trend, you know. If we can develop something like that, then the application you talked about would be really useful in this endeavor. Thank you.
I mean, AI researchers, machine learning researchers are very keen to do research which has a data set available. And one of the reasons I got involved in Quran and Hadith studies is because these are data sets that are available, whereas medical patient records are not available. And therefore that put me off getting involved in medical research.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I think it's Prof. Zeki.
Thank you, Professor Atwell, for this interesting lecture. I would like to thank you very much for this overview of the work you are doing at Leeds University. I would like to ask you to extend that for future plans. Supposing that you are going to get more students, what do you think would be the topics in Arabic and Islamic studies you would propose for such new students in the future?
Okay, well, I have to say, my head of school has said I have too many PhD students and I can't take any more until I finish with the ones I've already got. So they're not coming straight away. But the obvious thing is to make this technology more directly accessible to everyone. So ChatGPT, the great leap was to put it in a chatbot so that anybody could log in. And Microsoft have it now as part of their Edge browser, so anybody can use it. But that's the general ChatGPT. The next step will be to have specialized versions for which are trained or tuned to Islamic studies literature, for example. And it would be nice if you and other Islamic scholars could essentially go to a website, upload your texts, and then press a button and you get a version of GPT which only answers questions on those texts and not anything else. So therefore you can, I think that's the sort of research areas. How can we have specialized language models rather than the very general large language model? And how can we ensure that those are going to be used to answer just the questions on the topics that are trusted?
Okay, I think we don't have any more questions, Prof. Thank you once again for your presentation. Thank you so much.